Amber Marie Beard, aside from being my classmate at Gibraltar High School,
which should top my biography.
yes, that's number one. Locker buddy of Miles Danhausen Jr. Is a sustainability professional with over 15 years of global experience. Before starting her own sustainable advisory company, Project Habitat, organizations where she has worked or has led sustainability include Lend-Lease, China Resources, Surf Capital, Six Senses Hotel, Resort, Spas, and Pegasus Capital Advisors, all of which have demonstrated commitment to combat climate change and transform our world towards a more sustainable world. Amber's a native of Ellison Bay, a graduate of Gibraltar High School, and she has her bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and is I don't even know what all those
are. Lead AP.
Okay. There's a lot more letters at the end of that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that great intro, Miles, and welcome everybody. As Miles said, my name is Amber, and actually I'm just going to kick off tonight talking about global housing trends. And this is essentially to provide a little bit of context, looking at affordable housing as well as housing generally at the global scale with regards to local housing and affordability. So in terms of global housing trends, the largest trend that's out there today obviously is urbanization. Urbanization is obviously growing because of population growth and also everybody that's moving to more dense urban centers. For example, by 2030, it's actually estimated that there will be a whopping 41 megacities around the world today. And those of you that are not aware what you're actually looking at here is a picture of New Delhi from the air as it is today. This is how dense the buildings are, how dense the life is, how dense housing is right now in New Delhi. And that's today. By 2030, it's actually anticipated this is going to be the largest city in the world at 39 million people in one city. So trying to think about how a city like this is going to be able to house, much less feed that many people, is a huge challenge. And imagine 41 more of these around the world. On top of that, another big trend out there is really this demographic change that we're seeing. On one end of the spectrum, we're starting to see the rise of millennials, which means shrinking households. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also have this aging population that we're also encountering. So you have these two different generations that are coming together under shared accommodations. On top of that, there's the rise of the digital economy. Whether we like it or not, everybody is basically online. A lot of people work online, live online, play online. It's out there, and this is really transforming the way that we work. And not only the way that we work, but also the way that we live. A lot of people, myself included, can work anywhere and everywhere as long as they're Wi-Fi, for better or for worse. But what's happening with that is it's not just entrepreneurs and individual business owners that this is affecting, where you can work anywhere and everywhere, but even really big corporations like Google, like Microsoft, et cetera. They're offering these opportunities for their employees to actually take 2 to 3 days to work at home, for childcare, for reduced transportation costs, whatever the case. So you're starting to see this transformation of the way that people work. And this in turn leads to a transformation of housing as well. Residents want to live closer to where they work, or even better, would have working accommodations within their housing units. A lot of newer apartment buildings today I've seen actually are starting to incorporate co-working spaces within their apartment buildings to facilitate this. On top of that, of course, there's sustainability and wellness. Sustainability and wellness is grown. There is increased regulation around things, environmental and social aspects, of course. But I think the biggest change that we're starting to see, which is most encouraging, is this market transformation because of demands, and most people changing their lifestyles to really align with those that are more wellness-focused or sustainably focused. And this, in turn, as I said, it transforms that market demand and increases the demand for sustainable and healthy accommodations. And then on top of that, and finally, in terms of demand-side trends, affordability, because this is a global issue. It's not just a Door County issue or a Wisconsin or even a U.S. issue. Around the world, this issue for affordability and access to housing continues to increase. There's widespread housing shortages, lower property ownership, and this increasing income gap, which makes this ever more difficult to achieve or reach. Now, on the supply side of things, some big global housing trends that you're seeing out there is this emergence, or this convergence, I should say, of construction with technology. So this is really leading to some very cool and innovative ways that we're approaching the way that we build our houses, whether it be through digital collaboration tools or building technology where you have smart integrated sensors within your homes. There's also a lot more online marketplaces, so you have access to more consultants or more tradesmen or more products or more technology. And then also you're starting to see this increase in technology with the way that we actually build. So this leads itself to modular construction and prefabrication. So there's tons of really cool things that are coming out in the future as these trends continue to grow. But on the downside of this, we're still experiencing labor shortages. We have a lack of skilled labor around the world, and so this is obviously affecting construction and trade. Now, how these global housing trends and affordability come together is, as I say, affordability is an issue for all, everywhere. And it really starts with cities, because cities globally have become more economically powerful than they ever have before. And so this economic power actually increases the demand for their land, which in turn, of course, increases prices as well as competition for the housing and the land. Now, when you look at some affordability crisis drivers, like we said, expensive cities have simply not built enough homes. So they're growing at this rapid pace, again, to absorb all of that urbanization, but they are so unprepared for this, unprepared for in terms of employment as well as in population. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Things like NIMBYism, for example, restrictive or outdated land use policies, as well as things like constraints on geography. And an example that you see up here is of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is a city that I've lived in for a number of years, and I still absolutely love the city. However, it is the most expensive city in the world. And for those of you, anybody that's probably on Instagram or Facebook, you've seen pictures like the one up there. Very colorful, and it's very eye-catching, right? You look at the geometry, and you look at the colors, and you look at that density, and it's very awe-inspiring. However, what you don't see is what's happening on the inside, and this is because of the crush in the lack of housing, is that you actually have, again, this aging demographic that can't afford to pay the new amount of rents or house prices, that are forced to live in rooms of like 6 to 8 people in these sort of locked cages. So essentially they sleep there and house their stuff during the night, and they're all out on the streets during the day. So this is their approach to affordable housing. Unfortunately, that's not working, and they're actually looking at creating a man-made island off of one of their other islands to try to spread out this housing issue. I do not suggest that for Door County, but this is one approach that they're doing. And rents, of course, have been increasing ever faster than incomes. In the US alone, we've seen an increase of 22% on average between the years of 2006 and 2014. And at that same time, we also saw a decrease of incomes with an average of 6%. So you're starting to see this gap widening and widening further. Escalating rent burdens fall heaviest on the least advantaged, and this is especially true in the US, where over 50% of renters today are considered cost burdened. That means that they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And as both Virg and Mariah will tell you in their presentations, 30% is around the sweet spot of where you should be at. Anything more, and you continue to see yourself further and further in debt. And this is just like a vicious cycle. And housing has become a financialized vehicle. It's turning into an investment vehicle, basically. And this creates an oversupply of luxury housing and a lack of affordable housing. And this is happening in both developing nations as well as developed nations. And just a little bit more on that in terms of what I mean by financialization is that housing is treated as a commodity, essentially. And it's a means of accumulating wealth. And it's often a security as part of financial instruments that are bought and sold on global markets. So what that results in is that housing that is increasingly intertwined with the flows of global capital. So housing markets are actually more responsive to those global flows than they are to local markets. So even though money is actually poured into housing, it hasn't contributed significantly to supply. Instead, what it creates is an increase in ultra high-end units that are extremely expensive to produce and that nobody can afford. This picture that you see here is an extreme example of that. This also is from China. It's what is called a ghost city. What happens in China is they build these cities in the anticipation that urbanization is going to happen and people will live there. It's kind of like the build it and it will come philosophy. And in most cases it works. But for this particular example, you can see this is actually nobody lives in the city. Literally, these buildings are just a financial instrument. So many of the people actually buy the property as an investment but have no intention of moving in. So it inflates the supply, nobody can afford to live there, and nobody does live there. But that's, like I said, this is China, and it's a very extreme end. But these issues of being attached to these global market flows are really systemic in nature and beyond the scope or control of local markets. However, that isn't to say that out of these challenges that there aren't some really cool new housing types that have come up to address some of these issues. The first one that we're going to talk about is called shared housing, or also co-housing, as what you might hear it. These aren't some sort of like hippie communes. You can start to think of them as more like hip communities. It's true. It's this transformation, right? I mean, and it's an alternative approach to affordable housing. So you have these smaller units that people live in, but there's these amazing amenity spaces that are provided, whether they be like chef-level kitchens or fantastic dining rooms or shared community gardens or maybe even bicycle sharing. There's some really innovative approaches to really embrace this sharing economy that is starting to pop up. And it's wearing away between this public and private space. So tomorrow's housing is actually going to be really integrated into the fabric of the community at large. This is going to be very important. The next housing type that's coming up is called flexible housing. And this addresses some of the demographic changes that I talked about. It's driven by the aging population as well as millennials. And on the right, you can start to see how this demographic has really changed the way that we use housing. For example, in 1960, renter households, 44% were married couples with children. And if you fast forward to 2016, we're down to 19%. So this means that a typical one-bedroom to two-bedroom standard apartment mode doesn't necessarily fit these new demands. So apartments and communities and units will need to adapt to serve a greater variety of household and housing needs in the future, which is interesting. Also popping out of this is this idea of multi-generational housing as well too, where you have millennials living with the aging population. Also, we have wellness and health is also its own little housing niche. It's about really embracing, again, that wellness and health lifestyle that I talked about earlier in terms of trends. So this type of housing incorporates built-in wellness amenities, so enhanced air quality and water quality. And while we may take that for advantage up here, for a lot of people that live in places like New Delhi or even New York, having fresh air and fresh water is everything, right? It's often more toxic outside than it is inside. We're also seeing sensors to track air quality and water quality. And there's also an increase of wellness centers and programming directly within the amenity space for housing units. So you could have a Pilates studio, a yoga studio, you might have a biohacking lab. I mean, it spans a whole range of different wellness amenities. Because well-being essentially extends beyond just physical fitness and the food that we feed ourselves, to include things like socialization or mental health or even sleep quality. So all of these are really driving this new approach to housing to cater to this increasing awareness about health and wellness. And then, of course, sustainable housing, housing that relies heavily on passive design strategies, uses non-toxic materials or sustainable materials. These are buildings that also incorporate a high degree of biophilic design, which is a lot of green, vegetated design inside and out. And it also aims for increased efficiency as well as self-sufficiency. So, for example, in terms of energy, it would be energy consumption reduction and potentially energy production on site. And it also incorporates the area of green building certifications. And then finally, as a housing type, I listed affordable too. And you may say, well, we've been talking about affordable for a very long time, and I do agree. But the type of affordable that I'm talking about is one that integrates all of the other trends that I've been talking about: sustainability, wellness, flexibility, and shared. So that's the new affordable housing type that we're starting to see. And this is a great example. And for those of you that are architect geeks or love that sort of thing, this is actually affordable housing that was designed by Bjarke Ingels. He is the owner of BIG, which is a big star architect. This particular unit is in Copenhagen. They're all modular, prefabricated, beautiful spaces inside with beautiful shared spaces outside too, a lot of greenery. And this was his take on affordable housing. So I see it as really encouraging that you have such mega star players in architecture embracing this new modality of housing. So this intersection of affordable housing with global housing trends and types, it's really, you gotta ask yourselves if the cost burden have to pay the financial price of just being cost burden to start with. They're also most impacted by climate change, air pollution, water pollution. They're probably the most vulnerable demographic of our population when it comes to changes. So we need to ask ourselves, is a house really affordable if they can't afford to run it, if they can't afford the energy or the water? Is the house really affordable if it's actually toxic and contributing to medical illness and increased medical costs? So these are all questions that come up, and I truly do believe that the way that this is going with this merging of health, wellness, sustainability, flexibility, and shared living, that there's a lot of benefits for tenants and communities with this approach. It can reduce health problems associated with poor quality housing. It can provide energy savings, which also increases the level of affordability for tenants. And it also frees up a lot of excess money as well too. When all your money isn't going out to spend for energy and utilities, you can use it on fresh, clean, whole foods, or you can use it on healthcare and all the things that support a vibrant community. It provides families with greater residential stability. You're never wondering how you're going to make next month's rent or where you're going to leave. So it really reduces mental stress for both adults and children. Shared living reduces individual resource consumption and increased financial efficiency and the sense of community. Then flexible spaces also last the test of time because they're built for that. They're not disposable housing. So they can adapt to these different demographics and ensure a longer life cycle of a building, which is great for a community too. And modular and prefabricated buildings can support greater efficiency with building materials and reduced waste. So it's great for tenants and it's great for community, but it's also equally great for developers because investing in affordable housing that has sustainable and wellness attributes to it can be a driver for returns in that by providing a tenancy that uses less energy, you're more than likely to retain your tenants for a longer period of time. This reduces what's called churn rate, which is usually very expensive for property owners. So by doing so, it provides an enhanced level of financial stability both for the tenants as well as for the developers. And then on top of that, investing in housing that is flexible and shares resources could reduce a per square foot development cost and attract a whole new demographic of tenants, which is really exciting. So while these incentives are great and they're attractive and they're great topics, sometimes it's just not enough to attract developers into low income and affordable housing. And that is where policy comes in. So with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Mariah. She's going to talk about housing in Door County.